putting all these groups together because you all have something in common. With you three, it's a little bit more. I've been trying to put everybody together, trying to find the lines they want and what have you. Three of you worked the same line, and you all know each other and traveled up here together. And Charlie, we've got you from Chicago. Oh, sorry, this is, you guys, the three of you were D.C. to Florence, South Carolina, right?
Yeah.
And Charlie, you worked Chicago to D.C. and what else? What are the lines?
The line I retired from was the Pitts in Chicago.
Pitts in Chicago,
right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking a little bit about one Southern Road, but we're also, there's so much stuff that you could talk about that's RPO in general.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I do want one question just for the folks that ran, and you two, because it does get warm in the Pitts area too. Talk about the conditions on the train, certainly during the summer when you were riding the cars, and did you have any air conditioning? Did you open the doors? How did you deal with the heat in the hot summers in the South and the Mid-Atlantic?
It was tough.
We didn't have air conditioning, but we had fans in the little small fans, but a 12-inch in the ceilings. But they didn't cool much. We had to keep the doors open, and they sucked in a lot of dust, so it got right dirty.
Yeah.
It was very hot and very dirty.
Thinking back, I don't remember it bothering me that much. It was hot. I know other people that did, but it didn't bother. And I'm one famous that can't stand heat, but I don't remember it bother. I had so much to do that I wasn't worried about the heat.
But
got wet one time, you was wet.
But during that time, we didn't have air conditioning at home either, so we were kind of accustomed to it.
Right.
I didn't have air conditioning until 1983, I think it was, at home.
So let's talk about, certainly I hear about the dust and the dirt, and that's for all of you on the train lines. What was it like? How did you manage? Did you have different clothes that you wore just for the day at work that were going to get completely dusty and dirty? Or what was the environment like when it comes to dust and dirt on the train?
What we call a road grip. In other words, they made a standard road grip. And you carried your work clothes and your schedule, your cards that you had to study, and the books, all in the road grip. And you wore this just like this. And when you got in the mail car, you took these off and folded them up, put them in a grip, put your work clothes on. When you got down to the other end, you went to the Y. Most of us stayed at the Y, took a shower, and put your clothes on, your good clothes on, to go out and eat or anything. And that's when it went.
We looked altogether different when we were off of the train.
As a girlfriend of mine said, I'd be look like that, and then when I got cleaned up, she said, "You cleaned up really nice."
So,
let me add this. When I was first started working, I used to stay in the railroad Y down in Florence, South Carolina, and they charged it 35 cents a night. And it was worth every bit of that just to take a shower. And we come up here to Washington, they'd charge you 50 cents a night. But it was worth it to get some of that dust and dirt off of you. But then the Washington Railroad, why I put in air conditioning, and they went up to 65 cents.
was it worth it?
It was worth it.
The one down in Florence, the Y in Florence had I guess a 36-inch fan built in the wall at the end of the hall, and each door the door going in had a transom over it. And if you open the transom and open the window, that fan was suck the air into it, made it bearable. But if you got down at 7 o'clock in the morning, had to go back to work 2 o'clock in the evening, you ain't get much.
Well, let's talk. You mentioned the Y and the places in D.C. I'd like to talk about, I've been hearing from the clerks some interesting horror stories about the worst place that they stayed. What were some of the worst places? Let's start with Charlie. What the worst place you ever had to stay while you were working as a clerk?
Earl Hotel in Pittsburgh. You could hear the roaches walking across the floor.
I stayed there twice.
Okay.
When I was substitute.
Yeah, a lot of roaches in there.
Yeah. Well, that was the only place you had to stay. I didn't think the railroad Y here was a fine. The one we had here, I mean, it was for being away from home. And like I say, it wasn't no Holiday Inn, but it was fine because you were tired. You worked 17 hours. When you got go to bed, you went to bed. That was it.
It was a private home down near the train station in Florence, South Carolina, that some of us would stay. She didn't charge but a quarter a night. But that was nice too, and you didn't, the wire was block and a half from the train station, wasn't it? So Ms. Moore's place was better, just across the street.
What was the worst place you stayed at?
I made some trips on the seaboard, and I stayed somewhere then in Hamlet.
Hamlet, the hotel in Hamlet.
And that was the worst place I ever stayed in my life.
What made it so bad?
I don't know, it's just everything seemed so dirty, and
It was right at the train station.
It was right at the train station. The train go by, wake you up. We weren't accustomed to that.
I would agree with Otho, Hamlet, North Carolina. A few times I stayed down there. I had some nice places to stay at. When I first started out, I worked on the highway post office, and I worked on a train called Newport News to Charlottesville. And they had lodge, and there was three of us on the train. We got off from Newport News, and the place where the other two gentlemen stayed at, it was full. So I got to stay in this place called the Hotel Warwick. It was an elite hotel in Newport News that time, and I stayed for the same price they did, and they got quite upset about that. But when I was on the Richard Lynch and Richard Clark's, I stayed in a place called Blackstone. I was on the Richard Clark's and Dillwyn and Richard Lynch, and they were private homes, and they were very nice. And of course, the wire up here when I was on the seaboard up here. And on the seaboard, it was nice up here. But Hamlet, North Carolina was the worst one.
How many of the four of you started out as subs?
Well, all of us.
Did you all start out as subs?
Right.
Everybody
Actually, I had somebody who spent like he said an hour as a sub and went right to regular.
I was a regular in the Richmond Post Office, and I had to go back to subbing to get on the train. But it tickled me to death because when I was subbing in Richmond, I worked 70 hours a week, and it was $2.16 an hour, and I had 4 children, and I made a lot of money. And when I went regular, I think it was regular 4 weeks, and it looked like I'd quit. The paycheck wasn't nothing. And when I got back on the road, went back to subbing, went back up, and the subbing was better for me at the time.
That's what I've heard. 2 things about subbing is the money was better, but you didn't have any control over your schedule. They'd call you whenever they needed you.
Yeah,
See, we didn't have any.
No overtime.
No overtime. It was all straight time.
You might have 150 hours.
When I started, they paid $1.12 an hour. That was 1948.
I quit a job making $2.16 to go to the post office making $1.96, and it wasn't guaranteed but 2 hours a week.
And why'd you do that?
And I had 4 children.
And why did you do that?
And my wife said, "Well, I thought it was to me, to be an postal clerk was just like throwing a rabbit in a briar patch. That's where I belonged. And if the train was on, I would just chucking right now if I could. I think all of us would. I don't know if any. Well, we had a few of them that left. They couldn't. A lot of them couldn't take the motion.
Get motion sickness.
Motion sickness and things like that.
How long did it take you guys to get used to the riding on the train and standing the whole time with all the motion? Did you get used to it pretty quickly, or?
Yeah,
I loved it.
You get used to it pretty quick. We had a fellow work with us named Douglas Botion, and all the mail cars had safety bars up in case they put on brakes or something, you could reach up and grab them. And he wore overalls, and he'd say he'd put his Gallister straps over the safety bar so he wouldn't fall.
But you're talking about the hours. I've got a pay stub at home that was in September of 1962. I worked 194 hours in 2 weeks. That was the most I ever worked. And I saved them all for years. And finally my wife, "You gotta throw these things away." But I saved that one. And she met me at the train I was coming through Richmond, I'm going to Washington, and she met me, took my dirty clothes and gave me the clean clothes. I didn't go home for 29 days. That was where I was going up or down. I'd call her, and she'd meet me at the train with clean clothes and take my dirty ones and back. I said, well, I'll be back 2 days and do the same thing again.
She was happy because she had peace at home.
She
Yeah,
didn't have to put up with it.
Yeah, let's talk about that. The schedules are fascinating for people who don't really know much about this, that you would work for so many days at a time and then have so many days off. It's kind of an odd schedule. How did that work with you, and how did it work with your families, especially the wives,
Worked
to
fine.
have you gone for so long?
It worked fine when you went regular, because a lot of the runs were 5 days on and 9 days off. And like me and him, the last run we had, we worked Monday through Friday this week, and it was all Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And Friday night, we generally went to work at 4:30 in the evening. But the off Friday, we didn't go to work till 8:30 and got back home at 5:30 the next morning, and then it was all Saturday and Sunday, and then Monday we started the same schedule. So when summertime came, you could take that Friday as an annual leave day, and you work 5 days and off 9 the whole summer. So it was well for that way. But if when you say you take a day off, it wasn't like take 8 hours. If your trip value was 12 hours, to take it off, you had to take 12 hours off. And like some trips, value was 17 hours. And if you took one trip off, that was 17 hours of vacation time for that one trip. But it worked out well if you worked 3 days, like 6 days, you work 4, then you take one trip off, and you give you 2 days plus your 6 days off, gives you 8 days off. So you could work it real well.
Charlie, were you married at the time when you were on the trains?
Partially.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that when you were
I got married while I was on.
What did she think about you being away from home so long, so many days in a row?
I was never away from home too many days in a row.
Oh, okay.
Most of my runs, I was in Chicago one day and back the next day.
So she didn't marry into someone who was gone for a week at a time?
No.
But when we were subs, you'd get the time off, but you were putting up examinations all the time. You may have an examination on some state that you never worked, and you had to study on that pretty good while you was off so you could pass that, so you could continue to work.
You know that we got paid 48 minutes was an hour. In other words, we got 12 minutes an hour for studying.
Right.
And that was a benefit. But most of the time, like Otho says, most of the time you were studying. If you had 4 or 5 schemes, you had to be up on them all, and every week you were getting changes. And you had to register that, having 4 zip codes. In other words, you looked at a letter, like in North Carolina, and you had to know where that letter went. There wasn't no zip code to tell you where it descended. You had to know it by memory. And a lot of us had 4 and 5 states we had to keep up with.
How often did you practice and study for your schemes?
How long it took to learn it?
Well,
Did you find that took a lot of time when you talk about your 48 hours? You had the 12 minutes, but certainly you did it on your days off as well and evenings. Did you find that you spent a whole lot of time studying, or?
yeah, you spend a lot of time because, like I said, sometimes you'll be putting up examination on a state that you didn't ever work, and it wouldn't stick with you. But
As long as you worked,
the states that you were working, would just come natural to you.
Yeah.
And you just practice casing it at home, and so you could stick them fast enough to pass the examination.
then if you were a postman on the train, you had labels to go in the mail pouches, and you may have a stack of them that high to make one trip. Well, you had to take your stamp, hit the back of every one of them, what train and what date, for every one of them. So that took your time. So that was just getting ready to go out on a run, and if you had like a bundle of letters, you pulled out a bundle of letters, you had to put a label on the back of it with your train number and your name on it. And when it got to wherever it was going, if it was an error in it, they would write the error on the slip and send it back to the mobile office, and then they'd send it to you. And if you got so many of them, you get demerits, then you didn't get no pay raise.
Did anybody have trouble with that?
I never did.
No?
No, I never did.
You all did a good job on your sorts, huh?
We didn't check a whole lot of errors on other clerks.
I don't think anybody, I'd get every now and then, get a slip back, and I'm sure I made more errors than that. Somebody on the other end probably just didn't list them. But if you work as much mail as we work, you're bound to make an error. Two stick together, nothing else.
So on the train itself, what was the worst job, in your opinion, to do?
Personally, I thought it was a newspaper job, a newspaper clerk.
And why was that?
That was the dirtiest job. Jumped up these #2 sacks of newspapers, getting all that black ink on your fingers and throwing them off, and it was just, the sacks were dirty when you dump it dust out. You know, it was a filthy job to have.
Yeah, Otho, what
They
about
weren't
you?
too dirty to sleep on, though, were they?
What'd you say there, Charlie?
They weren't too dirty to sleep on, though, were they?
Well, I tell you one thing, if you work Florida papers during the wintertime, you ain't do no sleeping. We used to go to work, I'd go to work at 8 o'clock at night at the station over here, working Florida papers, and I'd get to Florence, South Carolina the next day at 12 something, and I'd still be working Florida papers, and when I got off, the crew going to Jacksonville would get on and start working Florida papers still. In the wintertime, see, everybody went to Florida, and they got their hometown newspaper. And so in the wintertime, you were working, it was just storage cars full of them. Every time you got to the station, you'd take out the ones you worked, the baggage man would take them back to the storage car, and he'd bring you another load to work to the next stop. It was a time, it was like Bobby said, it was a dirty job.
Yeah, Otho, what about you? What was your least favorite job to have on the car?
I didn't like to serve local. You know, where you throw mail off and catch mail on. But you have to run up there and open the door in cold weather, hot weather, raining, snowing, whatever. I didn't like that much.
Yeah, how were you at kicking the mail or throwing the mail off? Did you usually make your targets pretty well, or?
As far as I know, I never did look back and see mail flying up in the air.
I have one time, not me, but I've seen it done.
Yeah, what about you,
The train, if you don't throw the pouch out far enough, the train will suck it back underneath and tear it all up.
And then it looks like a snowstorm.
I tell you a good tale about that. They've heard it a million times. But we had a clerk. We had about 4 or 5 Joneses, and every one of them was named from the town they come from. In other words, the one I'm talking about was from Hopewell, Virginia, and he was called Hopewell Jones, because that's the only way you could keep them straight. We were going down the road, and a guy put a box of chickens on at Rocky Mount, and the clerk in charge called back. He was a newspaper clerk, and told him to make sure the Dunn chickens, Dunn, North Carolina, make sure the Dunn chickens get on. Well, we didn't stop at Dunn. The train, you took the chickens on down to Fayetteville and put them off. The day train came up during the day, you'd give them to him, and he would stop and put them off. And we went through Dunn about 85 miles an hour, and Jones hauled up, told the clerk in charge, said, Captain, the Dunn chickens are off. I come up through that 2 or 3 days later and I asked the porter, I said, what happened to them chickens the other night? He said, I cleaned chickens off the side of the station for 4 hours. They were baby chickens, 250 baby chickens to a box. And he done throw them things off and they just splattered against the side of the station.
We had 2 Jones brothers. And the initials, one of them initials was IC, and the other one initial was FA. We called one of them in close, and the other one far away.
So what about you, Charlie?
Every-
What was the worst job on the car, in your opinion?
I actually, tomorrow, in my opinion, I never had a, what I
Bad
would
job.
call it. One of them was, some was better than others, but they were all good.
I don't have any.
There
No-
wasn't anything
nothing-
you
nothing
hated
notable.
doing that day?
Nothing notable.
So what was it when you get on the car? What do you always hope you would get? What did you want to do on the car? What was your favorite job?
Nothing special. See, as a substitute, most of the time you knew what you were going to do, especially if you were on a foreign line, and that would be dumping mail, setting up.
That was what the sub usually had to do?
Right. Mm-hmm.
In other words, if you didn't know nothing else, if you didn't know the mail, they'd put you to dumping.
Right.
That was what Bobby was talking about, dumping Florida. You just stood at the end of the table with number 1 sacks and dumped Florida papers on the table. And about every 30 minutes, all the sacks would get full. You had to pull the table down, pull all the sacks out, and then rehang and start all over again. And it was dirty. It was a dirty job. But like he said, never got dirty. You couldn't go to sleep on them.
Right, 'cause I got some pictures laying up asleep.
So did any of you do the night trains?
All of them was nighttime.
Yeah.
All of them, okay.
Yeah. Worked
Very
both.
few day trains.
What was it like? I know we talked a little bit about the catch and tossing with you, but catching the mail at night, how hard was that?
Well, when you first started doing it, usually a senior clerk would be on there, and he would tell you when you were getting to where you had to just throw the mail off and catch the mail on. But the engineer would always blow, and I got to the point where I would time it, so I knew how much time was between each station. I'd look at my watch when I hear him blow, and then I'd run up to the door and throw one off and catch one on. And that worked pretty good for me.
So did the engineer use, for all of you, did the engineer usually
Yeah.
blow the whistle a couple of times? Or?
But if it's daytime, you could see out. You could
Yeah.
tell where you were. But nighttime was
But you
hard.
can rely on the engineer pretty well.
But you never served many, and like at 10, 11 o'clock at night, you never served local.
Yeah.
It was always like early in the morning, in the afternoon.
It would be
Because
dark.
most of the time the post office had to be open. Somebody had to be there to catch the mail and put it up. So like night train, like anything after 9, 10 o'clock at night, you just run. That was it.
Another
Stop
thing too, on the morning trains, if you were serving a local, someone would be waiting for you, and they would probably cut their car lights on, blink them, let you know that you were about there. See,
Okay.
that was another clue.
Yeah, one person mentioned that a guy would be standing, that he was told a guy would be standing with a lantern.
With a lantern,
And
yeah.
you could see the lantern moving, and he tossed it hoping that he hit somebody, at the right time. Did you ever have any problem? You were subbing the whole time, Charlie, or did you make it as a regular after a while?
The last 2 years I was a regular.
Did you ever have to do the catch and
Yes.
throw? And how were you doing? Did you do a pretty good job, or
Pretty good.
yeah? Did you ever hit anything that you shouldn't have?
No.
You wouldn't admit it.
I have missed a few, and sometimes snow will freeze a bag, and it will not bend, and you just knock it off.
So
You know, I
the arm
it'll
doesn't
freeze
bring
up.
it in; it just knocks and falls off.
Just knock it on the
See,
ground.
the bag had to, when you caught it, it bent
had to
over.
bend.
It's so stiff, like he said, it's so frozen, it just stays straight up.
And then some of my areas you got to watch the doors because they'll freeze up between stations.
Yeah, that was a problem.
We
The door
were
would freeze
off.
up, you couldn't get it open.
Right, couldn't get the door.
So you're waiting, and the whistle's blowing, and you're about to make the catch, and the
And
door
you-
won't
And you
open.
can't get the
won't
door
open.
open.
So we watched that. It didn't happen too often because we used salt. And another place, Upper Sandusky, Ohio, we had to have the engineer slow down. It's going too fast. So that we knocked it down by the speed.
But when I first started, they had a lot of little small lines like Richmond, Clifton Forge, and all. And if you missed the local, the engineer would stop and back up and let you get it. But later on, they didn't do that.
I was going to say that probably a little bit unusual. So if you did not yourselves, have you heard of anybody who kicked it off and hit something they shouldn't have?
Oh yeah, it fell in. A lot of times there was a stream nearby or something, and the mail would get in that, which it threw off. Someplace, where was that place? The guy kept a boat there. He said it was always going in the creek.
Water down here between Fredericksburg
In Quantico.
and Quantico.
He kept a boat because he said somebody was
Everybody
always throwing it in the water.
And then they had one over on the seaboard, New Hill. They called it Pig Pen because it was always going in the, like low marsh, and they put up a great big fence. So when you threw it, it went in the fence. And that was their nickname to stop the pig pen. I had the one that ever happened to me was at DeWitt. We had a day train came up, and I throwed the pouch. The train wasn't running that fast. And I throwed the pouch off, and the man was standing there to get it, and he knocked his feet off from underneath him. And he fell down, and a couple of days, well, 2 times, the day after that, when I came back up, he hid behind the building and threw a rock about that big at me.
Well, one thing I've also heard a lot about from different clerks are the pranks that were played on the cars. That there doesn't seem to have been any RPO car that was prank-free, and whether it was usually on the subs or on a guy on his first day, but lots of pranks. Is there anything that comes to mind of you guys as maybe the best prank you heard or played or was played on?
Well, I work with a gentleman named
Here's the king right here.
Bill Keller, okay? Now, Bill Keller had lost his voice box from alcohol, smoking, whatever. And he had put that thing, voice, to talk to. Well, sometimes we worked on 76 going north on Friday nights. These two birds would be on that, and they was on the opposite aisle from where Bill and I worked in New York City, and Bill was my helper. And they kept agitating him, agitating. And I would tell Bill certain things he could tell him, okay? And he get to the point where he could say it, and you understand every word he said. He never used that thing to help his voice because they just got on his nerves awful.
So, Otho, you were the troublemaker?
No, he's making that up. This fellow Bill Keller he's talking about, he and the chief clerk were good friends, and the chief clerk come out there and made an inspection trip. And Bill was working in New York City, and the chief clerk asked him, he said, Bill, how you doing with your distribution? He said, I'm doing pretty good. He said, I got 3 piles. He said, what I know I put here, what I think I know I put here, and what I don't know I put here. So he said, I got 3 separations, here, there, and everywhere.
I tell another story about this guy. We used to catch 93 or Washington and we'd be at work around 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. And so he never showed up for work. And so we got in Richmond. I came on home, and later that afternoon his wife called me, and she said, Bobby, I said, where's Bill at? I said, I don't have an idea. I said, he never showed up for work this morning. So she called back a couple hours later. He got drunk and fell down on the track stand and busted his head wide open, and he was in the hospital up here. He was quite a character.
Sounds like.
This dude here took you ever seen a brake shoe on a crane? On a train? It's about this long, about that thick solid steel. And they put 2 of them in my road grip. And I went to pick the road grip up like it broke my arm. I grabbed hold of that thing to jump off the train, and my arm straightened out. How did we lock? I was thinking about Gallifreyan. How did we lock his chain? He was the clerk in charge and used to sit on a little stool. When we got to Richmond, he would make out his trip report, and he'd sit on a stool. We used to take a chain and go around the damn stool, and then take a lock, your post office post lock, and put it on his key so that he couldn't get it unlocked. He'd have to get up, we'd go on home. He'd have to get out the car and go find somebody that had a key so he could get it in the lock to get himself unlocked.
He was
bald-headed.
He was a
Didn't have
character.
a hair on his head.
He got one of these Crosley old automobiles when they first came out, and he'd drive it up to Broad Street Station in Richmond, leave it. And when we get off in the morning, about 4 or 5 of us would go out there and pick it up and move it to another parking place. And he'd come out and he'd walk where he left, see him scratching his head and looking all around, and he'd find it and go on. He never said a word.
The first 2.5 years I was on the trains and HPOs, I was single. I eventually got married, and this guy, Bill Keller, my wife, we only had one car. When we got off 93 in Richmond, he would take me where she worked at, and I'd take the car home, and she'd get a ride home with someone else. But you don't know hot summertime, anytime, he'd get off that train, and he'd get in his car, and he had a pint of Madeline Moore whiskey. He's the only man I've seen turn up to his lips, drink over half of it. When the bottle left his lips, he sat there and grins. God, that's good stuff. That's the reason, one of the reasons he didn't have a voice box, too.
That's what kept us going.
This fellow we used to call Goofy Reynolds. What was Goofy's name?
Melvin.
Melvin.
The
Railroad Mail Association had a picnic in Richmond one day, and some people were fishing in the lake out there, and they caught an eel. Well, Goofy had to go to work that afternoon, so he took the eel and carried it to work on the train, and then where the little bathroom was on the train, you had a sink you could fold down, and you could turn the steam on in that sink. He put that eel in that sink and turned the steam on and cooked him and made him.
He'd go to the store and buy canned goods that the label had fell off of. And he'd shake it like this and open that thing. And I remember one time he opened up a rutabagas and eat the whole can. And he used to keep a stalk of celery, like where you put your lettuce, you know, and he'd stick it in. He wouldn't pull off a piece of celery, he'd just take the whole stalk like this and go on with it. But the worst part about it, his son graduated from West Point Military Academy, and his wife told him he had to buy a new suit to go to graduation. He said he wasn't going to do it, and so he didn't go. And it was maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, and I went in the transfer office at Richmond, get ready to go home. This real nice-looking young fella came in, and he said, "Do you know where Melvin Reynolds is? Have you seen Melvin Reynolds?" And I said, "You mean Goofy Reynolds?" He said, "No, I mean M.M. Reynolds, my father." I felt about that high. And that was the one that graduated.
What about you, Charlie? Do you have any pranks that were played on?
No, we didn't do it.
Or don't tell me you guys were well behaved.
No.
That was part of
I
it.
did a little poker playing.
Oh, Lord.
We had this guy.
Tell me about the poker playing here.
I saw him at the Fort Pitt. We used to stay in the Fort Pitt. Did you stay in the Fort Pitt sometime? The hotel?
I don't know the name of it.
But they had to pay for a drawer in one of the hotel rooms because they used the drawers to sit on, metal drawers in the chest. And they had to pay for a few drawers.
Because they'd open up and use them as chairs?
No, they sit on the side of it, and they bent the drawers.
Oh.
And they had to pay for those. Because some of the guys, when they got to the terminal, they had to borrow some money when they gambled on the train. You know, in order to be accommodated and get some food. Simple as that.
Most of the guys that I know like the poker playing crew.
Yeah.
Because they'd work like the devil, get the mail up so they could play poker.
Right. Mm-hmm. That was a common thing.
They were, most of them were all good clerks because they'd work like it. Maybe wouldn't get to play for 5 minutes,
Right.
but they would work like the devil so they'd get up and play poker.
We had this guy in Florence, lived in Charleston, South Carolina. He'd played a lot of tricks on people. And he and this fellow from Petersburg, Virginia, were good friends. So the boy in Florence got his wife to call the one in Petersburg and talk to his wife and told her that she went to high school with her and she'd be coming up through Petersburg such and such a date, and she wanted to stop by and see her. Well, Jack King's wife didn't know who she was, so she was trying to think of who she was. So she made Jack paint the whole inside of the house. And later on it leaked out. Henry Jack, he was some kind of hot with Harry Lewis.
He was the same one over here, right here in the station. They went in the grip room, and somebody, must have been about a 14 shoe. It was about that long. And they just took a regular old post office brown envelope and wrapped it around it with 2 rubber bands and put his name on it and mailed it to him in Petersburg. And that shoe made the rounds. One mailed it to somebody, one mailed it to somebody, and finally his daughter was there one day. She said, Daddy, says, postman just put something in the box out there that says so big it's sticking out. And Herbert said, that damn shoe done got back here again. He took it and threw it in the trash. Everybody had that shoe one time or another. They mailed it to each other.
We had a clerk that had he got one of them mail cranes that sit on the side of the tracks. They was taking
When you
it
catch a
down,
crane.
Right.
and he bought it from a railroad company and put it out by his mailbox. And he came out on the road telling us all about it. So we took a ketchup pouch and put a label on it and addressed it to him and sent it to him. He was upset about that thing. He brought the pouch back.
Have you ever seen post office pouch locks?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Well, they come in number 3 sacks, and it takes a good man to lift a sack of them. And this dude here mailed me a number 3 sack, and he put it all in front of the house, and I looked, my daughter was dragging it up the house, this road to the house, and I went out there and had my name on it. And one other time they cleaned up all the trash in the car, all the drink cans, paper, all the old twine, and everything, put it in a number 1 sack and mailed it to me.
He liked that kind of stuff.
Did any of
Never
you ever
know.
have run-ins with the inspectors or an unhappy or, surprised? I'm sure they were all surprises when the inspectors show up on the cars. But,
No, they were usually pretty nice. They'd come in and make inspection trips with us at times. If they knew somebody was, taking stuff, they would be
They would
on
always
there
do it
checking
outside
on
the
them.
car.
But they would call them outside the car and talk to them. Never in the car with the rest of us.
Nobody ever got dressed down for not having the gun or not having your badge or your ID or anything?
No, it was automatic where you put your badge on and your revolver and when you first got on there. When you changed clothes, put your dirty clothes back on.
The only time I know it wasn't an inspector, but I forgot the guy was in charge of the mobile unit at the time. But we had a guy who was clerk, and he was sitting up on the mail was slack, and he was sitting up on the ledge and had gone to sleep. And this other clerk took a book of matches and stuck it right in of his sole of his shoe and lit it off, and the matches like that. And when he got to his toe, it burned his toe. Well, he woke up and he hauled off and hit the guy standing in front of him laughing. Well, a big fight ensued. Well, one of them wrote up the other one, and they wrote to all of us about what happened. And everybody wrote back, I didn't see it. I was standing in the door looking out. There were 13 of us in the car. And I don't think it was Rigsby, but he come down to the car. We were all working. And he said, now, he got in the door. He said, I want to see all 13 of y'all get in this door. That was the answer. Everybody wrote, didn't see the fight, was looking out the door. And he come down and asked, I want to see it. I never will forget that thing. That's Abner.
Yeah.
When I was on the seaboard, we had 2 guys. We had one guy that was a big agitator. And he was always starting stuff between different clerks. So they pulled a prank on him one morning, and one was a register clerk and one was the other guy worked in North Carolina. And they got arguing back and forth, and it got pretty heated. And he was in between them because he was just adding to fuel to the fire. All of a sudden, both of them pulled their pistols out, like go shoot each other. You'll see him flying with that mail car. That was Sterling Page.
Yeah.
Sterling said he gave it was Alexander Lexan, and he give Alexander a lot of lip every time he get on the car. He was dump the pouches, dump the sack, but he would always, just playing. It wasn't nothing serious. But Ellick, one morning, he done put one of them wax bullets in a gun, and Page got to carrying on with him, and Ellick says, I'm tired of this damn stuff. So I done took enough of it, pulled out the gun and shot. Page, he had a pair of shoulders about like this on him. He grabbed his sword, oh my God, I'm shot. after he found out what happened, he says, what would you have done if I'd have jumped out the door? Running about 70, 80 miles an hour. He said, what would you have done if I had jumped out the door?
He said, I knew I was shot, but I didn't see blood anywhere.
So how did you guys all do on your arms exams? Were you all good marksmen?
Poor.
Poor.
Yeah, well,
I never hit the target in Chicago. Live bullets. At a range in the post office. Mm-hmm. Take my test in Pittsburgh with wax bullets. Hit the target every time.
We used to go.
So you're a marksman with the wax bullets, not so good with the real things. Huh?
Well, no, when we went to Richmond, like I lived in Richmond, I could go, if I had to put up an exam, then I had to take my gun with me. Mm-hmm. And the woman would look at my gun and I have to shoot it. I'd shoot it into a piece of canvas with wax bullets. But we went over to the agriculture department in the basement. They had a rifle range over there, a pistol range. And they used to send us over there to test them.
How'd you do?
Huh?
How'd you do?
Oh, that thing of mine, you shoot it and it goes like it's here. You know where it was going to hit it. The funny thing about that too, we had a clerk in charge named Bookman, and he went over there and had a gun, and the instructor was still there. They had just redone the whole place, put new tile in the ceiling and the walls to cut down on the sound and everything. And I think they had 3 booths to shoot in. And the guy, Bookman, put the gun up like this, and he was so old he couldn't pull the trigger back. The gun was so stiff. And the instructor told him, said, well, put the gun like this here, put it in both hands, put both fingers, and he says, go like this and come down and fire. And Bookman went like this here. When he got right here, he pulled the trigger, and the gun went off, knocked the acoustic ceiling off. Then the man said, get the hell out of here. I never will forget this. I was over in the next booth firing, and he told Harvey, said, get the hell out of here. You know, she tore the tile, 2-foot tile, they were glued, and the bullet just went down, the ceiling just knocked them all off. He was a bird.
How about you two? Pretty good with the 38s, or?
I took my training at Federal Reserve Bank in Richmond.
we're good enough to qualify, but nothing to brag about.
Well, when I went to Richmond to put up exam, Miss Hofhammer,
Norma Hoffman.
yeah, but she would always, and you had a canvas, real thick canvas hanging up, and the only thing you could tell, the wax bullets were like a reddish purple looking color, and when they hit the canvas, they would make a imprint. But they're liable to go anywhere.
So you said you're good enough to qualify.
Jesse James may have had this going on.
Yeah, we were good enough to qualify.
What counted as qualifying? What was the score or the?
I don't remember now. Do you?
I don't think I ever qualified over 2 or 3 times.
I don't remember what the score was.
You talking about, we a while ago talking about the woman called Goofy? Mm-hmm. He went down to this lady in Richmond to put up exam, and he pulled out the gun, and Miss Harvey asked him, says, the gun loaded? He said, no, not the gun loaded, it ain't loaded here. Boom! And one of those wash basins, on the wall, what do you call them, enamel? Blowed a hole in it about that big. And she made him pay for it, and he made her take it down off the wall, and he took it home. You remember when that thing happened? He blew a hole right in the wash basin. She told him not to come back either.
But we didn't know much about distributing mail.
Now, the 3 of you worked the same line. You worked together the whole time, or how did the 3 of you know each other from the trains?
Well,
Were you
we
on the
worked
same
together
train for?
off and on. We would work together.
When I was subbing, I would run with everybody. But
Yeah.
when I went regular, me and him was in the same crew.
And Bobby worked up with us too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I call them on Friday nights usually when they agitate my buddy Bill Keller. See, but I ran with Otho and Harvey. Otho's father was a clerk in charge out there when I first came out there in '61. Mr. Mitterer then, but I worked the two hopos of Richmond, and I worked Newport News, Charlottesville, and Washington Seaboard, and also in Florence.
What is some of the oddest things that you ever carried on the car? I know there's chicks, there's gold, there's, I don't know. Did you have ever insects that broke open, a box of insects that broke open, or
Honeybees.
honeybees?
We carry honeybees and carry a little hive, and then the wild bees would get in there and get on the outside of it. And, you felt uneasy handling them when you had
take
to
off from
unload
Florida
them.
with a case of bees, and when you got up here, you might have a whole boat, 150, 200 hanging on it, and picked up on the way up.
And did they leave you alone for the most part?
It never bothered me.
Yeah, they wouldn't bother you. You just hated to pick them up to move them around. And little alligators. They used to mail a lot of little alligators from Florida.
That's right.
Have you ever seen a queen bee mailed?
Yeah, we have the little containers.
Little tiny thing about
Yeah.
that big with a hole in the side. That's all it is.
Yeah.
No,
But
we
now
have a whole hive.
they send whole hives.
They send a whole
About that
hive.
long, look like a box kite. That's what it looks like in a box kite. Baby chicks, you used to get baby chicks all the time.
But every now and then, just by accident, one of those little alligators would get out and run around the car, and everybody was chasing him, trying to catch him, put him back in there, just by accident.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Well, did you ever have, were any of you registry clerks at any point?
I was.
Dealing with, yeah? And what do you think was the most valuable stuff you were carrying? Do you know, or?
Well, when I first started, we used to send a lot of money to Cuba. I went down on a train in the morning at 75, and we'd have a whole bin of money. And when they brought the mail down to the train here in the mail house, they sent some Marine guards down there with shotguns.
We used to carry Fort Bragg payroll.
And when we left here, wasn't anybody paying any attention to the money. And we'd get to Richmond, and it'd be police meet the train. And, at every place you stopped, the police would meet the train. And we carried it down at Fort Bragg payroll sometimes. And they have guards bring it down to the train. We throw it over in the bin. And when we get to Richmond, the police be down there and meet the train. We got into Fayetteville, helicopters be flying all over. And we had just thrown it over in the corner, forgotten about it.
Every morning, just about every morning that we went down, the Federal Reserve in Richmond got money. And it was always packed in new pouches.
Okay.
And in other words, it'd be 35, 40 pouches of new money. When they got to the Federal Reserve down there, they put the Richmond stick on it, the Richmond Federal Reserve, but it's printed over here. So it wasn't worth anything. You couldn't spend it because, in other words, it hadn't had the seal on it. But and then a lot of times we'd bring it back where it was old, and they'd cut it in two and send half back one day, the other half next day. But like he said, we'd get the payroll on. Theirs was those 38 pistols carried down the road, and we got to Fort Bragg, helicopters, armored cars, machine guns, and everything else be there.
How about you, Charlie? You never work registry?
Yes. At Pittsburgh, we signed for the whole car coming out of Washington. And I don't know what's in there, money. Some of the cars had stamps going to the Chicago depository. And what they would do, they would send, I had a run where they would send me down. I worked on the West Division. One particular run, they sent me down on the East Division to McKeesport to sign for the register to come back. I worked with the crew. I think McKeesport must be about 15 miles from Pittsburgh.
Yeah, about that.
And work with the East crew, and then East crew get off in Pittsburgh. Then I take over in the West crew. That was kind of odd, but we signed for the whole car. Mm-hmm. And when you get to Chicago, the lock is on. The only thing you're doing is really reading the lock. you don't see anything. And in Chicago, you have armed guards.
You were met by the armed guards
Right.
there as well.
Rifles.
Any helicopters in Chicago, or no helicopters? There's-
They used to land up on the top of Chicago post office.
but meeting you as they had here, meeting the train in Richmond.
No.
No,
No.
weren't using the helicopters quite that way. I know we've got another group of guys coming in, so just a couple more questions for everybody. And one I'd just like to ask you, and one word I hear a lot from the guys is camaraderie. You know, and I can see it certainly with you guys who work together and are still friends, obviously. Let's start with Charlie a little. Talk about the guys that you worked with on the train. Did you get the feeling that, I don't know, that you maybe knew them better than their own families, or we were friends for a long time as well? Or was it just you worked together?
Friends till both of them passed away. Matter of fact, I had a friend in Chicago. Couldn't make it. He couldn't take the details. I can talk. I had a good conversation with him over the phone, but when I got the details worked out, he couldn't pick it up. And I told him he had to stay at home because I'm down in Alabama and you in Chicago, and doesn't have anyone to go with you because. If I didn't meet up with him, he could not deal with the options. You know, if my plane is late, if I was in Chicago, he'd be here.
Yeah.
He would be here.
And how about you three? Besides the camaraderie you have here, were there others that you got really, really close to that you worked with?
I would think so. I had a lot of good friends, because a lot of them passed away now. You know.
Yeah, most of them are
You
gone.
develop good friendships with them. You know.
But when I left the road, I went into the Mechanicsville, Virginia post office, and after I was there a couple of years, I was promoted to postmaster. So I had a supervisor vacancy, so Bobby was in the Richmond post office. I got him transferred out there with me. So one day a postal inspector came by. Harvey lived in Mechanicsville at that time, and he came by and he asked me Harvey's name. He told me Harvey's name or know where he lived and all. And I asked him why he wanted to know. He said he was going down there, he was going to interview, find out from his neighbors. He was doing an investigation on him to see if he was qualified for the postmaster job then. So I told him, I said, he's just been living down there a couple of months. I said, I know more about him than any of those people down there. So he said, I'll ask you the questions. So he did, and I told him what I knew, and he got the job.
I was postmaster. All of us he ended up postmaster, him and me. All three of us ended up postmaster.
So one final question for everybody is, if you had only one thing that you wanted to tell the American public about the work that you did and the work of the RMS, Bobby, what would it be?
Well, I was one of the saddest people in the world when they did with the RPOs, because like Harvey says, you know, I worked 3 on, 1 off, 3 on, 7 days off. It was hard to get used to start working 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. It was miserable for a long time.
It was the worst thing for me.
It was a good job. And my father was a railway mail clerk for 45 years, and he got me out there. And he told me, he said, if you want to get in the railway mail service, fine with me. But he said, I got a good reputation out there. If you go come out there and just play around, not work, don't come out there. So I went out there knowing I had to work.
You had to live up to it.
Yeah, but it was a good job, and it was good for the mail services. Probably the best mail service the country has ever had. And I enjoyed the time off too, because I could think of some tricks I could pull on somebody when I got back.
My wife was talking the other night, and she said that they always talked about me, don't, if he comes to work for you, you're in trouble. She said he went to the railway mail service and they cut that off. He said he went down to the airport and worked down at the airport and they cut that down. Said then he went into parcel post and said they cut that down and sent it to Washington. Said he went into the logistics division, they shut that down, sent it to Washington. Said the only thing he did, they sent him to Gooch and said they ain't shut it down yet. But everywhere I went, that's the truth, everywhere I went, they got shut down.
And Charlie, any last words on the RPO and the?
Best job I ever had. The best.
Well, thanks guys very, very much for coming in for this. We really appreciate it.